across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Should we pay slavery reparations? That's the question we're asking this morning. I want your views on that. 0344 499 1000. This is because the Foreign Office is open to talks on that. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, will meet a delegation from the Caribbean in a few months' time. They were refused a meeting under 14 years of the Conservative government because that is something they thought shouldn't happen. Now Labour is open to it. Reparations, of course, remembering what happened in the past, our colonial past, those reparations, trillions of pounds, that's what's being asked for. Should we be paying those out of our taxpayers' money? I don't know about you, but there are quite a few things at home I think we should be paying for first, rather than to people who may or may not be relations of people generations ago who bad things were done to. But listen, that's just my opinion. Let me know yours. Maybe I'm totally wrong. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We're talking as well this morning about another fascinating story about universities. So university funding is now going to be contingent on something called DEI. We know diversity, equity and inclusion, and this is some people say putting ideological conformity above academic excellence. At the moment, you've got to put your academic proposals forward, then you get funding. About 60% of whether you get the funding or not is based on research. That'll be down to 50%, and 25% will be whether you're promoting people from other backgrounds, whether your research focuses on things to do with DEI. To me, that doesn't make sense, but what do you think? 0344 499 1000. We'll also talk about the Labour Council that's banning mourners from laying flowers on graves. We had many calls about this on Talk Drive yesterday between 4 and 7. Let me know your thoughts, and we'll reflect the fact that not only the good news, of course, that those Israeli hostages, Hamas terrorists took them on the 7th of October. 3 of them have been released this morning. But as that massacre was happening, during the time that the 7th of October massacre was happening, what were the Palestine Solidarity Campaign doing here in the UK? Making a call to stage the first march in the UK. That is what was happening as that massacre was happening. It is just absolutely horrendous. We're going to talk about that. Let me know your thoughts on all of these matters. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a WhatsApp voice message, less than a minute please, and we'll play them out. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring on the main number 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk. Julian in Coventry is first off the mark this morning. He says, regarding Lammy, I think we are all missing what we should be worried about. In his 2018 student activist style reparations rant, he suggested he's not British but Caribbean. So how has he been allowed to hold his office of state if the British interests are not his priority, says Julian in Coventry. Dan in Kent, morning Peter. What is the difference between a slave and someone who grew up in a workhouse? Because looking at history of my ancestors, conditions weren't much different. If we're taking reparations, maybe I'm in for a few quid. Stuart says, the Caribbean owes Britain reparations for fighting against slavery. It cost Britain approximately 5% of its GDP plus many deaths. Accounting for inflation, Britain is owed far more than they claim we owe them. Those are just 3 opinions that have come in literally in the last 6 minutes. So the question we're asking this morning is, should we pay slavery reparations? Let's ask Mike Buckley, he's a former Labour Party advisor, and Ralph Schoelhammer, who's a political theorist and professor at Webster University in Vienna. Mike, good to talk to you this morning, and to Ralph as well. You're both very welcome. Mike, what do you think should happen?
I mean, bear in mind the Foreign Office have denied that they're going to be having any of these conversations. So I read a number of articles this morning, and the footer of all of them is the standard statement from the government saying this is a conversation that's not going to happen. Although, obviously, people within government have leaked a story saying that it is. And indeed,
and also the UK signed up to a Commonwealth Summit statement in October last year that set out the need for inclusive conversations about reparations for slavery, and they need to address chattel enslavement, dispossession of Indigenous people, indentureship, colonialism, in order to move to a future based on equity.
I would be surprised if many people listening this morning were against people having conversations. And it is true that the slave trade happened. It's true that horrendous things happened to people over a long period of time. And it's true that Britain took a major role in all of that happening. So, of course, we should be having conversations about that and about what needs to be done. It is not true, and it isn't feasible that Britain or any other country that was involved, the US or France or Spain or anywhere else, has the ability, the financial ability, to pay what people have calculated. People have said we need to pay 18 billion. That's the UK. Our GDP is about 2.7 billion. So it would be all of our domestic product. It would be all of our money.
Should we pay anything, even if it's a smaller amount, Mike?
Well, David Lammy has said categorically, and the government have said that they don't want to pay any money. And I understand that because they don't want to establish a principle of we will pay some but not all, because that, of course, would get the UK into a very difficult position and it would establish precedent that other nations would need to follow. What David Lammy has said is that there is a case to be made for other kinds of redress. And I think opening a conversation on that would be the honourable and the right thing to do.
What sort of redress would you be in favour of? What would that look like?
I'm not actually aware of what other things have been discussed, but I would imagine there could be a conversation around helping these countries to develop, maybe in education or in terms of enterprise or in combating climate change, that will perhaps go beyond the help that we give to other nations. There may be ways that we can help them that would show that we're committed to them and the people that are living in those countries now and their futures. And I think that would probably be a sensible way forward. But I have no indication what David Lammy or the government's thinking about.
Ralph Schulhammer, what do you make of this?
Well, I think, we can have a conversation about everything. That's always a good thing. And one should, of course, don't forget that slavery was an institution that existed for millennia. So we should not just let this pass into history as something that never existed. But if we start to have a conversation about reparations, I think then it should be a broad conversation. And the way in which history is told, that apparently only one group of people have been slaves and another group have been slavers, that's just historically not accurate. I mean, there have been slaves on the European continent, there have been slaves in South America, there have been slaves in Central Asia. So are then all these societies that at one point were slavers obliged to pay reparations or to act, as was described previously, as supporters when it comes to development or something else? I think we must be careful not to create a moral double standard where apparently European slavery creates the obligation to pay reparations, but any other kind of slavery does not. I mean, if I would be facetious, I would say that sounds slightly racist to me.
Okay. Mike, what do you make of what Ralph has just said there?
Well, I mean, it sounds like a bit of a yes, but what about response to me. And I think we're not talking about other nations, or we're not talking about other slaveries. We're talking about the slavery that Britain was involved in, for an incredibly long period, and whether we have a responsibility to, in some ways, redress that, or at least indicate to the nations involved and the peoples involved that we know what we did, we know it was wrong, and we want to do
I don't think there's any dispute over that, is there?
But what we're being asked to do is to do something practical, tangible, that demonstrates that we are A, remorseful, B, recognise what we did was wrong, and C, want to help these nations in the future. And I think that's a conversation that the government should have, simply as a mark of respect, wherever it lands in practical terms.
I just want to remind ourselves what David Lammy said. Now, this was before he was Foreign Secretary, so this is in 2020. David Lammy, now the Foreign Secretary, but 5 years ago, this is what he said about this issue in the House of Parliament.
I'm afraid, as Caribbean people, we are not going to forget our history. We don't just want to hear an apology, we want reparation.
That's David Lammy. I don't think that actually was in the House of Commons, but certainly it was David Lammy speaking 5 years ago. He is clearly in favour, at that stage anyway, of reparations. But as we know, Mike, sometimes things change in government. We know that Ed Miliband has done a U-turn, for example, on a third runway at Heathrow. Do you think David Lammy is going to be pushing this through, Mike? Is this something that he's talking very passionately about that?
I mean, he's clearly very passionate about the issue. That will, of course, feed into the conversations that he has and the decisions that he makes. But he is, of course, bound by collective responsibility. He's now a very, very senior figure in the government. And indeed, the government is of course, dependent on how much money is available. And as we all know, there isn't a great deal of money available. And we know full well they'll be prioritising things like the NHS and waiting lists with the funding that is available. And that's entirely right. But he obviously brings a keen awareness of this issue to his role, and that's entirely right as Foreign Secretary. And he obviously brings a degree of understanding that you and I will never have. And he brings a degree of...
Why does he bring a level of understanding that you and I will never have?
Because we're white, bluntly.
Really? So we can't understand it? It's impossible for us to understand what people who've been through because of the colour of our skin, Mike?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, I think that's...
We haven't lived what he has lived, or what black people have lived, and to pretend otherwise to me is just silly, quite frankly.
Ralph, what do you make of that sentiment?
Well, I mean, somebody who's in the highest, in one of the highest offices of the British government, I don't really have a lot of compassion for. I mean, this is a career that probably would not have been possible in any other country. But let's stick to the issue at hand, which is that at the time of us having this conversation,
Barack Obama was elected president, Ralph.
Yeah, well, yeah, that too. But the point is, at this time of speaking, we still have 30 million slaves around the globe. So it's a little bit absurd. We talk about reparations for people whose great-great-grandparents might have been slaves, but we do nothing about slavery that actually exists. And this is the essence of virtue signaling. This is not about actual caring about people who are under horrible conditions or slave-like conditions or actual slaves. This is about, once again, beating one's chest in a kind of cultural historical masochism of saying, oh my God, we the British were the worst throughout history and therefore we have to pay reparations. The British made the contribution to end slavery. They ended it. The Royal Navy was absolutely instrumental. No other civilization in human history did this. The British, in my opinion, have done more than any other nation, and they don't have to do any more. Anybody who kind of, wants to talk about past slavery but ignores contemporary slavery, I think there is a hidden agenda there, and maybe we should talk about that as well.
Let's talk about what our viewers and listeners have been saying. We'll take a call in a minute or two, but this person says, Tony in Kent says, of course there should not be any reparations, even if anyone wants to make a case for it. Britain paid any debt in spades when it helped save the world from fascism, with devastating consequences for its economy and human loss. Chris says, how far back do we want to go in reparations? Do we get reparations from Denmark for the Vikings, or for Italy from the Romans, or Normans for the conquest, or Normandy for the conquest? Stuart says, Lamy must immediately start discussing reparations from Italy, brackets Rome, and the French Normans. Another person says, the majority of British people were poor back then. They had nothing. What do we get for the poverty of our ancestors? Graham says the Caribbean reparations payment will be the Chagos payment on steroids, says Graham. What do you make of that sentiment from our viewers and listeners? There are a variety of opinions, but those are some of them anyway, Mike.
I mean, I think they're all reasonable points, but I mean to go back to what my commentator said, talking about slavery today, slavery is there today, and of course that needs to be addressed, and our government is doing work to address that. I mean, it talks regularly about the work that it's doing across Europe, to smash people smugglers and the gangs, and that's of course related to modern slavery, and that's entirely right. But that does not mean that we should not be talking to nations in the Caribbean about reparations and about some kind of redress, whatever that is. And I would, as I say, I would be staggered if that ever involved any giving of money. I don't think that it ever will. But that conversation I still think is about. But of course, we should be talking about modern slavery. And the people who, have contacted your programme, it's entirely right that we talk about, the issues that are and the pressing need in our nation today. But I think to talk about the Norman conquest and somebody mentioned the Second World War. Of course, we took part in the Second World War, and of course, we did the right thing. That doesn't mean that these other issues aren't also of concern. And my fellow commentator mentioned the fact that we did our bit to end slavery, and we did, and that was absolutely incredible. And that, of course, should be part of any conversation. That is indeed something that we can be incredibly proud of.
Ralph, final word from you.
No, I completely agree. I mean, the issue is we could run. I would actually be curious. My fear is that even if one would pay slavery reparations, would these countries then be better off? I mean, if you, for example, give money to the regime in Haiti, will they then be better off? It's a little bit, and this is not aimed at my co-commentator, but generally, very often in the West, we have this attitude that if we just throw money at the problem, it will go away. I'm yes for the conversation, but I think if we really want to help societies that came out of slavery, I think there are better ways than just throwing money at the problem.
Thank you both, Ralph Scholhammer, who's political theorist and professor at Webster University in Vienna, and Mike Buckley, a former Labour Party official. What do you think about this? Should we pay slavery reparations? Let me know. 0344 499 1000. Lots of messages coming in. Mike in East Sussex says, it amazes me a man that at every chance talks of payment for slave reparations and his proud African past is happy to sell or give away a complete colony to a country that has no right to them, says Mike in East Sussex, referring to the Chagos Islands there and David Lamy. Jane says, morning Peter, one day this UK government will do something for UK citizens. Doubt that will ever happen. We have seen what is happening since July. Paul says, good morning Peter, my family was forced to leave Ireland and come to England when the potato famine happened. Where do I sign up for reparations, please? Well, Paul, David Cameron, I think, apologised for the potato famine. Andy says, no, we shouldn't be paying anything and councils should be concentrating on bin collections and local roads. Sean in Gloucester, we should only talk about reparations if we get the same from the Romans, the Vikings, the Saxons. The list goes on. It's an utterly ridiculous idea, especially when we were the people who ended it. How about something being done for us instead of everyone else for a change? Stephen in Manchester, first caller of this programme, 0344 499 1000. Stephen, what do you make of this?
Well, I think there was a Spanish historian writing in the 1930s, Santayana, who said, never since the ancient days of Greece had the world seen such a sweet, boyish master as the English. And we can be proud of what we did. We were first to the table in the resolution and ending of slavery.
We still did it, though. We were still part of it for a long time, Stephen. I mean, I absolutely agree with you that Wilberforce and the fact that we ended slavery was a very, very important thing that should be remembered. But it still happened, Stephen.
It happened ubiquitously throughout history. I've just read the biography of David Livingstone with his muscular Christianity and his hatred of slavery. He fought tooth and nail against it, and it was the Arabs for the best part of 1,000 years who'd operated slavery in East and Southern Africa out of Tabor, their colony that was established for the purpose, that we fought against. Zanzibar, where the stone market, the last slave market is in Africa, was abolished by Sir Bartle Frere. Those who know no history are condemned to repeat the mistakes they're at. This foolish nonsense where we're completely abnegating and destroying ourselves in front of the world has got to stop. We can be proud of our history.
Okay.
And in relative terms, the British Empire was the place to be. Many of them owe us a great debt of liberty and what we've left them behind.
Stephen, thank you for your thoughts there. Clearly a man who knows and is very interested in history, and we've got to remember that within all of this. Taff in Dover says, will the ancestors of the Royal Navy personnel who lost their lives stopping the slave trade get reparations? Same as the Chagos Islands, we have a complete and utter shambles of a government who hate this country, says Taff. Vern in Southampton, if we pay reparations, then we should no longer give a single penny to these countries, plus no longer issue visas to these countries' citizens. Pay the money and cut off all ties if that happens. Simon says, what is it with this government? We haven't got the money to help heat pensioners' homes this winter, but we can waste billions on bizarre reparations projects. This country seems to hate the people of this country. Anne in Teesside, ancestors of slaves who live in the UK would have their tax paid towards reparations. That would be a bit ironic, says Anne in Teesside. Lots of thoughts coming in this. Add yours to the mix. Use the break to give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number. We're going to go to the debate desk with Luke Gatos, who's a lawyer, writer and director of Freedom Law UK, and Andy Williams, the political commentator, will be with us after the break.
we need to get back to basics. When someone turns up here illegally, you've got to send them straight back, Mike. And if you find someone on the street, you've got to send them straight back. You've got to do that really, really quickly and not mess about. And we haven't. We've created this bureaucracy, this machinery, which enables lawyers to get migrants into a bureaucratic process, and delay for them is victory. The longer they can delay the case, the more likely it is that person's going to get to stay in the end, no matter what they've done.
Exactly right.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, lots of people getting in touch about reparations this morning. Matt in Royston in Hertfordshire says, Peter, no, we shouldn't pay reparations for anything that happened more than a century ago. Otherwise, where do you draw the line? Have us demand reparation from Africa for the Barbary slave trade in the 19th century, Italy to pay for Roman slavery? Andy in Alicante says, nice for you, Andy. Lamy says, as Caribbean people, what is he on about? David Lamy was born in London and is of Guyanan descent. Does Lamy think either London or Guyana is part of the Caribbean? Stephen Bromsgrove, all countries with power across history have used slavery as economic growth levers. This is a distraction. This is distraction politics. There are bigger problems to solve in our country, wasting time and money on reparations. And Justin says, in the 17th and 18th century, the Barbary pirates took over 1 million Europeans and Americans as slaves. We actually heard about that from Stephen in Manchester. Right, let's go to the debate desk. I'm delighted to say that Andy Williams is with us. He's a political commentator. And Luke Gittos, the lawyer, writer and director of Freedom Law UK. Andy, should we pay reparations?
No. And that's the UK government's position. We're not going to. Simple as that.
They're going to meet these people, though, apparently, according to sources saying that, this is in the Telegraph, saying that the first delegation of its kind will be meeting the Foreign Office in a few months' time. CARICOM has never attempted to hold such a meeting in the 14 years of the Tory government because the calls for reparations were repeatedly rebuffed by successive Prime Ministers. Luke, what do you think of this issue?
I just think the argument is historically and morally illiterate because, firstly, it ignores the obvious complexity around the slavery and the slave trade. Obviously, your callers have mentioned the role that different countries have played. You know, the Portuguese built the boats, the Brazilians took 5 million slaves in the course of the height of the slave trade, and you know, it was around 40,000 people in Britain that actually owned slaves, and working people in this country were a huge part of bringing around the end of slavery. If you look at the role that Manchester...
Some of them would argue, and some people have already, that actually people in workhouses were basically slaves themselves. Should they get reparations? It's a big issue. We're going to continue to talk about it with Luke and Andy, but I just want to go to a call from Robert in Hertfordshire. Robert, you're on with me, and Luke and Andy as well. What would you like to say? You're very welcome to the programme. Robert in Hertfordshire, hello.
Sorry about that. Well, don't, you know, with repatriation, aren't we doing that now?
No, this is reparations. So repatriation is, Robert, repatriation is sending people back. Reparations is giving sort of money for things that happened hundreds of years ago.
That's what I mean. I do beg your pardon.
No worries, no worries.
Correcting me. But we're already doing that. You know, to move on in life, you have to draw a line under. So what we're going to do? Sue the Germans for bombing our chip shop during the war? I mean, you know, maybe you can educate the people and let them know what the Irish went through with the slaving, white slaving.
Well, I mean, the potato famine is something that was apologised for, certainly. And I mean, would you be happy for your taxation to be put into reparations for things that happened hundreds of years ago, Robert?
No, I wouldn't. I think we're already doing that now with allowing migrants for all different countries coming here to settle. You know, especially the Caribbeans. They've not done too bad here. I mean, apart from a couple of blips along the way, but there's been a lot of Caribbean people who've made a living. Made a good life here. David Lammy included.
And many of them have made a big contribution to your country, including through the Windrush generation. Andy, what do you make of what Robert was saying there?
Well, I think Luke set out the moral case very well, but there's also a practical case. It's impossible for us to ever be able to afford the scale of reparations that are being called for. So the Prime Minister of Barbados says that Britain owes nearly £4 trillion. That's about 300 years worth of government spending.
I wonder how you calculate that. I mean, how do you actually come up with that figure?
And I think, Robert's point is a good one, which is where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
That is the essential challenge is, where does it stop? Where do you draw the line? Did we play an appalling role in some horrific practices over many decades? Absolutely. Did we? Yes. Did other countries? Yes, also. But this is just not, it's not the answer. Also, it's not the solution.
The question I always want an answer to is, who gets the money?
Right.
Because if you say the governments of those countries, well, are the people who actually were victims of slavery or are the descendants of people from slavery? Also, what happens if you are like a quarter Caribbean and you're 75% white British, for example? Well, do you get a quarter of the money? I mean, how do you actually calculate this? It's a very strange kind of concept, even by itself, even before you start, Luke, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. It's practically unworkable, and that's often why calls for reparations are vague in what they're actually calling for. You know, you often see people making the kind of philosophical argument that really what people mean by reparations is some kind of recognition of the history of the slave trade. I mean, I think we do
which there
quite
has
well.
been,
I think we have quite a reckoning with our history around slavery. I think we've done quite a good job.
And we don't deny it, and we talk about it, and we've apologised for it, and we've apologised for other historical things that we've done previously. And I just wonder where this ends, essentially.
Well, I think we need to start looking at the problems that these countries face in the current moment, and I think we should stop talking about the past and think about how we can actually get involved in development and trade and things that really give a lasting and reliable source of wealth for these countries, because the key thing about reparations is that it keeps countries dependent. That's what we're talking about. We're still maintaining that kind of relationship of economic dependence, which is what no one wants. You need to build resilience in these
Also, if you do it now, well, what about people in 100 years' time? Do they benefit from it? You know, you can say, well, okay, we'll put a lot of investment into schools, hospitals, whatever in the Caribbean now, but actually in 100 years' time, if things are really bad, if governments have mismanaged that, well, then people in 100 years' time don't benefit from that.
And there is a why now question as well. Why at this moment in time? Why not 30 years ago? Why not in 30 years' time? And as I say, it's just not practical. But I would just reiterate, this is a classic misleading Telegraph story which says the Foreign Office is going to open talks.
Well, they have been told, the paper have been told that this delegation, the CARICOM, is attempting to hold this meeting.
Correct, but this is a delegation of predominantly Commonwealth countries, so of course the Foreign Office has to take the meeting. That's just how the Commonwealth works. Don't think we're going to pull out of or disband the Commonwealth. But if you read to the end if you can make it to the end of this Telegraph story, it says in the 28th paragraph of 28, a government spokesperson said, the government's position on this issue has not changed. We do not pay reparations.
And the good thing is that the government would never ever lie to us. Stay with us here on Talk. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to get your point across on this. We're going to stay on the debate desk with Luke and Andy, and we're going to talk about universities failing to promote diversity. They're going to be facing funding cuts. Stay with us next.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, we're on the debate desk with Andy Williams and Luke Gatos. Let us know your thoughts as well. 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 and get your WhatsApps in and voice notes as well on the main number 0344 499 1000. Let's talk about this story about universities failing to promote diversity. They're going to be facing funding cuts. This is a really interesting one because there are worries about ideological conformity being put above academic excellence. Under the plans, the environment element has been replaced with a new people, culture and environment framework. This is to get funding for academic research. Critics say will put more emphasis on equity, diversity and inclusion indicators and DEI or EDI or however you call it. It is more prescriptive than the previous mechanism. So previously, when you put all your information in to say, please give me money for research, you needed to say the research element of it was 60% of it, and then there are all sorts of other elements, including this one. Well, previously it was, I think, 10%. Now it's going to be 25%. The research element going down from 60 to 50. Luke, are you worried about this?
Well, I'm worried about universities because I speak to academics a lot, I speak to universities a lot, and they talk of crisis. And a lot of this crisis is being driven by the Research Excellence Framework, which prioritises output, publishing above all else. The one thing that universities should be doing is cultivating an intellectual culture which can generate the next level of the next generation of public intellectuals in this country. And it seems that at the moment they're being asked to do everything but that. You know, they're heavily reliant on foreign students coming into the country and paying hugely inflated fees for basically vocational degrees. That has then been used to basically prop up humanities departments. That is now coming to an end. We see universities like Kent closing huge areas of their academic work across the humanities in order to focus on vocational training. So I think this is nonsense, obviously. I mean,
and asking so often, I mean, all that you've said there about far too many people going to universities, the whole funding model, as can so often be said, it's all Tony Blair's fault.
It's all Tony Blair's fault. 50% was a big mistake, I think. It completely demolished the idea that you can achieve in other ways, which is not going to university.
Thank you, correct.
And it turned university into a sort of storing house for people in their late adolescence, which I think is a really big problem. So yes, this is nonsense. It's part of the big diversity push that's always about, you know, appearing to be more equitable when in fact it changes very little. But it does speak to a deeper crisis with our universities, which is about what is university for now? It seems to be a massive vocational training pot, basically a Ponzi scheme where they take, you know, they take inflated fees from one section of the student body in order to, you know, prop up failing areas in other ways. I just think we need to have a serious debate about what higher education is for, and that could mean fewer people going, the best and brightest going, and going to focus on a subject that they're passionate about and becoming truly excellent in it. We need to reignite the debate around excellence within our universities and stop them having to justify themselves through absurd frameworks like this.
I agree with every single word you've just said. Andy?
And so do I. You don't need me.
No.
Actually, sorry,
you
this is very boring radio.
There's the door.
I, as a card-carrying Blairite, I think the 50% target for universities was one of the two worst things he did, and neither Iraq, by the way. I really, really think that was a disastrous move. Going to university has become a tick box exercise to get onto professional services grad schemes. That is the reality. Everybody goes.
What is the value now of a bachelor's degree? How many people are actually given a job with a BA or a BSc? There's so many people who need even more and more expensive education to get, or as you say, to get onto the professional services.
And it's not to discredit people who go to university and work hard and get great degrees from excellent universities, you know, good on them. And I just think, if I think back, when I was at uni sort of 15 years ago, me and my friends, the truth is none of us worked particularly hard. None of us learned a great deal. We actually found our A-levels much more intellectually challenging and stimulating and robust than our degrees. And talking about cultivating an intellectual culture and a culture of debate and disagreement and thoughtfulness and reading widely and thinking about different viewpoints, I just don't think that culture seems to exist at universities.
It really
anymore.
worries me that this huge amount, I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to, I am for equality, controversial view, But I just think that actually it should be about whether the academic research is worth doing or not, and shouldn't actually be about almost anything else, actually.
Yeah, but I also think we should value useless research. I mean, that is a large part of what academia is for. I mean, I did philosophy and music at university. It couldn't have been more useless. But it was a great period. And, you know, we need philosophers, we need musicians, we need excellence within the humanities, because it's about something deeper than economic value. It's about the kind of soul of our country. And, you know, we could do with a lot more people thinking seriously about the topics that the humanities covers, but that's not what's being encouraged at university.
Yeah.
I mean, Andy makes a really good point about the intellectual climate that we now have at university. So much of the research coming out around the kind of people that are attending university does speak to a kind of ideological homogenisation where some things you can't say, students are worried about.
And that is a big worry. It's freedom of speech. Andy, I'll come back to you just for a final word in a second, but I just want to get a voice note from Nick in Loughborough. You can send voice notes same way as you send voice note to anybody else on WhatsApp. Keep them to less than a minute if you would. Nick is in Loughborough and has given us his thoughts. Let's hear what he has to say.
Morning, Peter. The issues that have so far been raised by you today, i.e. the slavery reparations and the reduction in funding to universities that don't embrace diversity, are examples of this government doing everything they possibly can to show that they're diametrically opposed to whatever Donald Trump might do. This government is in deep, deep trouble. And I don't think they'll last the 4 years left. Have a good weekend, Peter.
Thank you, Nick. Well, Nick, you're going to want to tune in tomorrow, because we are asking the question tomorrow from 10 o'clock about whether you think politicians in this country should be more Trumpian. We will have a big think about that tomorrow during the show between 10 and 12:30 here on Talk. But let's get a final word from Andy on this, on the university. You had some points to make there.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to just touch on the DEI aspect of this story, because obviously, because of Donald Trump, there's been a huge amount of discussion and debate about DEI initiatives in the last few weeks. And I think diversity, equity, inclusion is important if it is thought out and implemented in the right way. And what I mean by that is there are people from certain groups who have suffered with fewer opportunities than others as a result of biases, etc. And I think there are ways that you can implement certain policies and initiatives to level the playing field and bring in more of an equality of opportunity, right? When you start to move towards equality of outcome, that's, a different question, but equality of opportunity is really, really important. And I think the way that some of the big tech companies have behaved in the last few weeks, Meta, Google ditching all of their DEI, I think is frankly, it's embarrassing. It's like Are
they just capitulating to the Trump agenda?
They are 100% capitulating to the Trump agenda. And in 4 years' time, there'll be another president who isn't Donald Trump, and they might have to start rebuilding all of these frameworks, because there are good reasons why companies of that size, with that much power and influence, should be thinking about DEI. Whether they're doing it in the right way is a different question. But they have thrown the baby out with the bathwater at the whim of one narcissist, and it's so... Mark Zuckerberg is such an embarrassing man. I mean, the way he's behaved is
Sounds as if we should have you on tomorrow, Andy. Maybe we should get you into our Trump debate tomorrow. That's Andy Williams and Luke Guinness. They're still on the debate desk and will be until 11 o'clock. Lots to discuss. Let me just read out a couple of messages, and then I want to ask Luke and Andy about something else which has really been exercising people in the last 24 hours or so. Jason in the Lake District says, surely if the government are saying that there is no truth in the story in regard to reparations, then based on their litany of lies, they will be doing the opposite. Starmer and his cronies can't be trusted, and if it damages our country, then they will do it. The magic money tree for anything that funds foreign initiatives is full of fruit. Well, we can't afford 300 quid for pensioners who are going to freeze this winter. Betty says, Blair's Labour forgot that a degree means you can complete a 3 to 6 year task and gain some formal competence. That's it. It's the ticket to the interview. This is an issue with equality. They got it and realised still have to work and then move on with reparations and DEI. Fair competition is the only way to grow a country and its people. Justin says reparations are intended to restore the victim to the level that they would have been. The descendants of slaves in Europe, the Caribbean and America have both higher standards of living and longer lives than the current peoples of West Africa. So without denying the horrors inflicted on the long dead slaves themselves by long dead slavers, whites and blacks, their descendants are better off as a result. Neil, Cardi P, a controversial view maybe, but that's okay, we don't mind controversial views on this station, but most slaves taken by the Brits came from West Africa and were transported to the Caribbean. Now, if we have hampered their lives and opportunities, why don't we offer to take them back to the countries they came from? I very much doubt their lives are worse in the Caribbean than the African countries they came from. Amanda in London on diversity cuts. Of course the self-righteous are up in arms about diversity cuts. They need the woke nonsense to feed their egos. Trump is proving, Derek says, that DEI is a waste of billions spent on vanity projects. Why can't we have a DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency that Trump has set up? Trump is doing so much of what the voters voted him in for. Labour have lied, meanwhile, and are doing nothing. And Paul says you're guessing the brightest and the best, establishing the trope that anyone other than graduates are bright. Thank you, Paul. Let's talk about an issue we talked about yesterday. In fact, we took a load of calls and messages on it yesterday, and I just want to get the opinions of Luke and Andy and to ask you whether you have an opinion on it today. If you still want to talk about it, that's absolutely fine. This is my show, but it's your show too. And that is about Nottingham City Council. They have decreed that after 7 days after a burial, that you can't add flowers or trinkets or teddy bears or whatever to a gravestone. This really annoyed a lot of our callers and viewers and listeners yesterday. Andy, what do you make of the story?
It is utterly ridiculous, and I think it says a lot about how our local government is run. I actually think it's a good justification for the decision that Labour is taking to combine some local authorities. We have too many layers of local government. Local government is populated by a lot of people who, frankly, are not very good. Very few people vote in local elections in Britain. Turnout in 2021 was about a third. So local government in this country is rubbish, essentially. It's not focused on the stuff people care about, bin collections, you know. Potholes, classic, exactly. But it's true, and it's really, these are things that are really, really important to people. If your bin is filling up with rubbish, that is incredibly frustrating.
And also you pay your council tax. I mean, what if you pay your council tax and they don't collect the bins every week or possibly every couple of weeks? Yeah. You know, what's the point of it?
And council tax is not cheap, by the way. I mean, it was quite a lot of money
in Nottingham
for people
as well. I mean, it's over, the average is over £1,000, in Birmingham actually, where they've had all sorts of problems with the council, the average is over £1,000 a year, which a lot of people have as well. Luke, your thoughts on this?
Well, one area of law that people might not know very much about, justifiably, are community protection notices that councils use all the time to punish what they see to be kind of very low-level antisocial behaviour. The reason I raise those is that these are used to deal with these kinds of behaviours by local councils all the time. And people might not realise that, you know, local councils love slapping these things on people that they see to be behaving in kind of antisocial ways. And so we've seen people issued with these notices, for example, for feeding pigeons, for, leaving relatively minor bits of litter around and things like that. It speaks to this kind of hyper-regulation of life that I think local councils are getting very into at the moment. And that really, this reminded me of those kinds of stories. I mean, of course it's mad. I saw I have to admit, I cracked a smile when I saw a detail within this story, which is the poor guy that's been leaving flowers on the same grave for 33 years and now been told he has to stop. But he said, what's really disgusting is that they're driving vehicles all over the graves in order to get rid of the flowers.
Yeah, yeah. Well, indeed, the tyre tracks, and that is, I mean, it's upsetting for a lot of people. Spokesman for Nottingham City Council said there are two types of graves that are cemeteries: traditional graves that can have a headstone and a larger curb set, and lawn graves which only allow headstones are an option for smaller curb set surrounds. All grave owners are made aware of rules about unofficial memorials and trinkets. This information is in the deed pack, which is issued when a grave is purchased. Plus there are notices around the site. We work with families with lawn graves to make sure that these grassed areas are kept clear for grounds maintenance all year round. Just before the break, we'll come back to Luke and Andy on the debate desk in a minute, but just before the break I want to hear from Craig, a voice note on reparations. This is the proposal anyway to pay for historical wrongs. Craig is sent us a voice note 0344 499 1000. This is what Craig has to say.
Good morning, Peter. The only reparations that we should be paying are to the families of the descendants of the British sailors who died at sea putting the slave industry to bed, okay? That's it. And perhaps maybe with one other exception. So any British citizens living here today who claim to have been descendants of slaves from Africa, as an example, well, we could make them an offer of a lifetime if it's something that they want to take up. And that could be to hand back their UK citizenship, and then we'd pay them to have a one-way ticket back where they descended from. And I can guarantee nobody would want to do that, because those people who are descendants of slaves living in the UK are in a far better place being here than they would be than being in their home country or country of stated origin. And that's a fact. Okay, thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Craig. One more before the break. Judy has sent us this voice note.
Hello, it's Judy from Altos, West Yorkshire. Reparations. Of course we should pay reparations to all those of the old descendants from slaves. As soon as we get ours from the Romans and the Vikings, all our reparations, we can hand it straight over to them. There you go. Problem solved.
Problem solved. Judy, thank you for your thoughts there. We'll be back at the debate desk with Luke and Andy in just a minute. Want your thoughts as well. Keep your calls, texts and tweets coming in. The phone number, of course, 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We're on the debate desk with Luke and Andy, but just before we go back to them and hear a fascinating story about someone called Jamie Michael, who you may not have heard of, but Luke's going to tell us about, I just want to hear a couple of voice notes. One from Christopher, who's got in touch about reparations. This is what Christopher has to say.
Good morning, Peter. I think the mastermind, Lammy, has come up with a great idea, this reparations. I only wonder how much he's going to get Spain, Portugal and France to chip in. And also, how much are we going to get from the Vatican for the Romans, Norway, Sweden and Denmark for the Vikings, the Algerians the Moroccans, the French, because actually we had lots of slaves taken from this country, and I think that if we billed everybody that enslaved our people and paid the Caribbean, we could come out with a profit.
Christopher, you make some very good and highly sarcastic arguments there. I appreciate your voice note there. I think that is a question for Rome, actually. Can they pay us reparations? Are you a Vatican or a Vaticant? That's my question. We're talking about puns a little bit later on in a minute, but before then, Rob on reparations, another voice note.
Hello, Peter. Robin Starbridge. Peter, with what's going on in America, where they're finding out about all the corruption from foreign aid, you know, from charities of US aid, do you not think that we should be looking into the corruption of our government with the Chagos Islands and these reparations, well, whatever they're called now, giving money back to people who don't deserve it? Do you not think they should be looking into that for corruption? And I'll say it again, corruption, because any politician who comes out richer than what he went in is corrupt, mate, corrupt.
Rob, thanks for your thoughts on that. I respectfully disagree on your final point there. I do think politicians deserve to be paid. And they will come out richer than they did, although it goes back, as everything else does, to that documentary about my previous life as a special advisor called The Thick of It, where at one point Malcolm Tucker, the main character, says that the public want you to... there's a politician who's complaining about how much money he earns or doesn't earn, and Malcolm Tucker says the public want you to live in a cave and eat grass. Right, we're going to talk now about someone called Jamie Michael, who you may not know the name, but it's a really, really interesting thought. He used to be a Royal Marine. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Luke, you've been doing some work on this, so just tell us this story.
Yeah, so Jamie Michael was actually a client of mine who I was introduced to by the Free Speech Union.
Because you're a lawyer, aren't you?
I'm a lawyer, yeah. So I was introduced to him by the Free Speech Union, who've done a lot of amazing work in bringing attention to cases like this. Jamie made a video in the aftermath of the Southport stabbings in which he talked about illegal migration, and he talked about organising his local community to basically form protection organisations. There were elements of the video that were quite poorly expressed, and Jamie in court accepted that. But for making this video on the hoof, posting it to Facebook, he was arrested, he was put into custody, he was held in custody for 17 days before he was granted
How is that
bail.
possible to be held in custody for 70 days without being charged?
So, no, he was charged.
He was charged
with an offence under the Public Order Act, held in custody for 17 days. It's a miracle that a lawyer came along and got him out, because otherwise he would have been stuck in prison until his trial.
Is he appealing against that or doing some...
No, so he was released. He has no... He can't appeal against it now. It's done. He's lost those 17 days. And ironically, it took a jury last week just 17 minutes to acquit him of any criminal offence. It was an outrage that this case was brought. And, you know, we need to have a serious look at the laws that govern speech in this country. So we saw in the aftermath of Southport, a lot of cases came to court which were arguably justified. People saying things like, let's go and burn down this mosque, let's go and burn down this hotel. There is a role... That is
incitement.
That's incitement, and there is a role for the criminal law to play in regulating that. But what happened was the reach of these laws became far too wide. And Jamie, luckily, and it's a testament to his courage that he said, no, I'm not going to plead guilty, which he could have done. He wasn't going to accept the time. He fought the case. It took months to come to court, and eventually he went in front of the jury, and the jury rejected the charges against him outright. So we need, but it shouldn't take people like Jamie, who is a massage therapist from, you know, the valleys. He's a working person, but politically engaged. But this hasn't been his life.
Andy, I'm worried. First of all, Luke, thank you for telling us about this. I'm worried about the fact that this kind of thing is happening.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, and clearly to be put in custody for 17 days for something that innocuous is ludicrous. I think the question here is all about proportionality. Some of the narrative, some of the discourse during the Southport riots and post-Southport was suggesting that anybody who had been convicted of an offence or sent to jail as a result of things they had said and done on social media, it was completely unfair. And as Peter just said, no. There were people who, sorry, I think it was you actually, Luke, there were people who said and did things on social media that were not just outrageous, but that were inciting violence, inciting racial hatred. And we do need to have laws to protect against that happening. You have and this is where I think there's a tension that we've not yet resolved anywhere in the world, certainly not in this country. As a publisher, which is what you are if you go on Twitter or if you go on Facebook and post something. A lot of people don't understand that, but you are a publisher. And if you publish, you might say it's your point of view, but we do have to have, unless you're a free speech absolutist, which I'm not, we do have to have some confines on what people can publish. You have a responsibility as a publisher. So my judgment, and this is the first time I've seen this story, and thank you for bringing it to my attention. My judgment on this is to suggest that we should have vigilantes going round, sort of taking the law into their own hands, is a proposition that I totally reject. But it was, I think, within his right to say that, and that is obviously why he's been acquitted within 17 minutes. So it's about being proportionate, and this was not an example of the law being proportionate.
I agree with everything you've said. I mean, I think the proportionality question at the moment is out of kilter in this country, and I think Jamie's is one case of that, but we see a lot more of them. You know, the problem with the laws as they stand is that they give almost absolute authority to the police and the prosecutors to decide what is and isn't a crime. We need some clearer laws. We need some clearer guidance on what does constitute a criminal offence. Because you're right, we do, you know, incitement is relatively clear. You need to incite something clearly with the intention that's going to be carried out. But that's not the kind of thing that's ending up in our criminal courts.
It's a fascinating story there, and thank you, Luke, and thank you, Tandy, as well, for being on the debate desk today. That's Luke Geddos there, who's a lawyer, writer and director of Freedom Law UK, and Andy Williams, the political commentator, giving us their thoughts. We didn't quite get to puns. We'll do that a little bit later in the programme. Fear not. Jane says, if everyone stops paying council tax, would we all be arrested? My husband was in a garden of remembrance till it was refurbished, and then I was told they were not having any more flowers or trinkets, so I have my own memorial in my own garden. Love the show, says Jane. We will talk about puns later on, I promise you. What is your favourite pun? Let us know. This is because it's 25 years since the Sun did the headline, Super Cali Go Ballistic, Celtic are atrocious, about a football match. Stay with us here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company this Saturday. There's loads to talk about, including whether we should give reparations to countries that we enslave people from. We're also talking, and we'll continue to in a second, about universities failing to promote diversity. Are they going to face funding cuts? We'll talk to one academic in a second. We'll also take your calls, texts and tweets about the best pun that you have heard. And on a much more serious note, we will reflect on those hostages who have been released by Hamas terrorists in the Middle East, and the fact that pro-Palestinian activists were planning a London march as the October the 7th massacre was actually happening. It was happening. People were being burned, people were being kidnapped, people were being killed, people were being torn from their families. And what was the pro-Palestinian movement in the UK doing? Planning a protest. That's what we'll talk about. We'll get your calls, texts and tweets as well on reparations, on the funeral issue as well. There's a big one on my show yesterday, Drive, between 4 and 7 on a Friday. Huge debate about funerals and laying flowers on graves. Nottingham Council saying that it shouldn't be allowed after 7 days after the burial. Let me know what you think about any of those issues. 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Send me a voice note. We've had plenty of those today. We'll have more between now and 12. Keep them short, less than a minute if you would. 0344 499 1000. You can send me a text message via WhatsApp on that, or give me a ring. That number again, 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss between now and 12 here on Talk. Yes, Tech Up Dave behind the scenes has been slightly struggling because people are sending really long voice notes. If you just keep them to less than a minute, we want to let everybody have their say. And if you just keep them to less than a minute, that would be brilliant. But we love your voice notes, and you can send them through WhatsApp, the same way as you send a voice note to anybody else. Lots of people getting in touch about all the issues this morning. Gary says, so your guest thinks that this meeting between the Foreign Office and the representatives from the Caribbean islands and the issue of reparations for slavery is just a courtesy and nothing will come of it. Well, I'm sure that once upon a time that's what was being said of the meeting with representatives from Mauritius over the Chagos Islands, and look how that has ended. Katie says, if the UK government pays reparations, I'm going to start asking for reparations from the foolhardy MPs who appear to have lost the plot, but don't worry, how I should be achieving my reparations is to stop making my 31st of January and 31st of July tax payments, says Katie. Paul says, how much do you think Cornwall is in line for in reparations? Cornwall's repeatedly raided for slaves by the Corsairs. Do you think Morocco will pay up, says Paul in Cornwall, and Sean in Gloucester. I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but what about the pun Labour made when they said that adults in the room, the adults will be in the room and everything will be fully costed, says Sean in Gloucester. Just talking about puns, we are going to talk about that later in the programme, because arguably the best pun ever in a newspaper was 25 years ago today in the Sun. It was when a small and not particularly, usually particularly good football team called Inverness Caledonian Thistle beat Celtic, the mighty Celtic. They beat them. It was a very surprising victory, and the headline was Super Cali Go Ballistic, Celtic are atrocious. Certainly when I worked in local newspapers in Northern Ireland during some summers from school, I worked on the Portadown Times, and Victor Gordon, who was the legendary deputy editor there, came up with a fantastic headline when I was sent on a sort of promotional fun feature thing. I went snowboarding with Miss Northern Ireland, and the headline was Beauty and the Beast. Victor is much missed, and was a fantastic journalist who taught me an awful lot, as did many other people at the Portadown Times, including its editor, David Armstrong. Now then, let's talk about universities failing to promote diversity. They will face funding cuts. There are worries about ideological conformity being put above academic excellence. Let's talk to Philip Kistley. He is the Senior Fellow of the New Culture Forum. He's also a lecturer in Culture Histories at the University of Leeds. Philip, great to have you on the programme again. You're an academic. What do you make of this?
Hi, Peter. It's brilliant to see you. I've actually left the University of Leeds now.
Oh, okay.
It's interesting to look at this. Universities do nothing but promote diversity, okay? And they've done nothing but promote diversity over the last decade and a half, 2 decades. So I look at this and I just look at, oh God, more of the same. And what we're talking about here primarily is teaching and impact, but we're also talking about research, and this is really important, okay? Academics are simple individuals who are governed by the carrot and stick principle, okay? And the research excellence framework, which gauges and measures.
This is what this is all about. This is the framework that this is all about. So if they want to get research through, they want to get funding for research, they've got to go through this research excellence framework, don't they?
This is what this is all about, and academics get stars for their research, okay? So if you get 1 star for your research, you're going to be right to the bottom of the league table and you're going to get no funding. If you get 4 stars for your research, you're going to be at the top of the league table and you're going to get lots of funding. You're probably going to be in the Russell Group, the elite universities, okay? There's a problem here because this excellence framework they're proposing now, this isn't about excellence. This is about the opposite. This is about equity. This is about leveling out. And
tell us about, just explore that concept a little bit in regard to equity, because it's different from equality, isn't it?
Yeah, equity is the same outcome for everybody. Equality is equality of opportunity. So you kind of all start from a similar kind of place and then it's up to you to achieve. Equity is about making sure everybody achieves the same thing. And so that is obviously the opposite of excellence. So if you're, and this has real implications, okay? So if you're an academic researcher or you're teaching or anything, you're just in universities, and one of your research questions is about diversity, and you come to the conclusion that actually diversity might not be our strength, diversity might be our challenge, then you're going to get punished under the framework that is judging you, the research excellence framework, because that is now set up to actively promote, advocate for diversity. So this is really, really difficult. And you can give all sorts of examples. You know, I don't know why the patient died when they were having brain surgery, because the brain surgeon had all the correct qualifications. They were of colour, they were in a wheelchair, they were non-binary. How's it happened?
I mean, this concept, this issue of equality of outcomes kind of scares me. I mean, I was at university and I was not as good a historian as many people. I was very average. I did history and politics. This is a long time ago, but I was a very average history and politics student at my particular university. Loads of people were much better than me. Some were worse, some were much better. But to think that somehow all must have prizes and that magically I was going to do as well as everybody else. I mean, I just wasn't as good as they were.
Yeah, I mean, lots of things come together here. So there's the usual thing of, you know, yes, we must award everybody. And this isn't new. Years ago, I remember being in a meeting a long time ago, 20-odd years ago.
Yeah.
And people were saying, well, we shouldn't use the word failure anymore, okay, because that's bad for students. We should call it deferred success.
Deferred success, brilliant. So my deferred success as a Wimbledon champion, I mean, I've always looked at Andy Murray thinking, you know, he's not that much younger than me, and maybe I could have been a Wimbledon champion, but you know, sadly, it's deferred success. So when will it be deferred to? When will I win Wimbledon, Philip? That's what I want to know.
Well, alas, you might not do that.
Well, I mean, I think that's the wrong attitude.
Then you'll have to deal with trauma, Peter. So it just feeds on itself, basically. You know, the key thing here, this is really going to impact on the creation of new knowledge. We know how it impacts on teaching. We know how it impacts on students. They go into university reasonably okay, and they come out as basket cases, okay, but it's going to impact on the creation of new knowledge, which is the really important thing. It's how we function in the world as a country, how we develop. And if we cannot deal with the truth and truth generated from research, because truth sometimes can be very ugly, it can be the thing we don't want, then we cannot develop as a society. And universities at the vanguard of knowledge, at the vanguard of truth, if they are actively turning their backs on truth and choosing equity rather than excellence, then my God, we do have a real problem. am I concerned about this? Yes, I am. But I'm looking to the US and I'm seeing hope, because the Donald Trump administration is really going for this and taking it.
And that's something we're going to talk about in a lot more detail tomorrow, actually. We're going to ask the question on my show from 10 o'clock tomorrow about whether this country and our politicians need to perhaps be a bit more Trumpian. We've had a text on this. This person says all these DEI programs are a race to the bottom where meritocracy comes second, and they also create division. I also want to say hello to Owen, who is listening on the road in Northern Ireland. Philip, I just want to ask you about another issue that we're talking about today, which is about reparations. Now, we're hearing, at least the Telegraph is reporting, that a meeting may actually happen with the Foreign Office and with David Lammy from Caribbean nations. Do you think we should pay reparations, and what's your reasoning?
Well, no, Peter, I don't think we should pay reparations for all sorts of reasons. First of all, you can't audit history, okay? As a historian, I know you can't audit history. It's not good versus bad. It's not right versus wrong. It's messy. History is messy, and there is nothing, my God, there is nothing more messy.
And you can argue, I mean, not that I was a particularly good historian, but what you can argue is that history as a discipline exists because people disagree.
Yes, absolutely, and it's understanding the past. Don't forget the British Empire abolished the slave trade, and then at great human cost policed, maintained the abolishment of the slave trade when many African leaders wanted it to continue. And of course, if we were to do this, then we would have to look at the trans-Saharan slave trade. Many descendants of slavers of the trans-Saharan slave trade live in this country now, and they themselves have brown skin. Will they have to pay an extra tax for enslaving the people of Africa and castrating the males? So this is very messy. Of course, the final thing, Peter, this would be trillions of pounds. It would. It's absolutely insane. They think they've got a hole in the finances now. My God, that's going to kick up.
And also begs the question, which a lot of our viewers and listeners are asking this morning, in terms of saying, hold on a second, what about us? What about here in the UK? What about the fact that we can't give pensioners a winter fuel allowance? Philip, great to talk to you as always. I know you're going to be in the studio very soon. Looking forward to meeting you in person. So thank you very much for your contribution. That's Philip Kisley there, who's Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. Paddy in Coulston has been in touch to say, regarding Trump and DEI, the problem is the activists took it way over the top. People are sick of kids being taught they can change their gender. There are dozens of genders. Enforced speech to satisfy a tiny minority. Men and women's sports, white makes being cancelled, etc. Their numbers may be small, but they have a voice way louder than their numbers. Thank goodness it's on the way out. Great show, says Paddy from Coulston. Brad in Cambridge has been in touch, says, morning Peter, it's absolutely ridiculous for Mike Buckley to say that a white person cannot understand slavery, but David Lammy can. When was David Lammy a slave? Can Lammy understand Britain under the Roman rule as well as me? Utter nonsense, says Brad in Cambridge. I don't think he was quite saying that. I think he was saying that just to defend Mike Buckley slightly, although I did disagree with his sentiment, he was essentially saying that we can't understand what black people have been through because we're not black. I presume you, Brad, are not black. And I think that, I don't know, I mean, I think that this sort of lived experience idea that you somehow can't understand where someone else is coming from unless you've gone through the experience yourself is something that I don't know what I think about it. I think some of it holds water for me, but mostly it doesn't. And I also think, it is extended in all sorts of ways. Like you can't have a character, in a play or a film playing a gay character unless they're gay. It's like, well, surely acting is pretending. I mean, that's what it's about. It's not about necessarily understanding every single aspect of it. James has been in touch and says, hello Peter, regarding the graves and the 7-day rule. If anyone told me not to put flowers on my dead sister's grave, I would say quite a few choice words. My sister died 61 years ago in 1964. My parents always arranged flowers for her grave every year, and I have now taken on arranging the flowers for my sister's grave. Well, good for you, James, and may her memory remain with you and be a very, very important thing. And it is such an important thing. And that ritual, that importance of laying those flowers every year and remembering, that is something that is very, very important to many people. We're going to take some voice notes and talk to you on the phone as well in just a minute. We will also talk in a short time about pro-Palestinian activists who were planning a London march as the October 7th massacre actually happened. Israel this morning has released 183 more Palestinian prisoners, and we know the 3 hostages that were being held by Hamas terrorists have been released as well. We'll talk about that very soon here on Talk.
Yes, I was.
Yes, he asked everyone if he would like a coffee, except me. And I'm his biggest fan. Who's this?
I don't know. On a Monday at 1 p.m, Regent Street Cinema, the oldest cinema in the world, in North Regent Street, shows an old black and white movie. And they showed a very famous film called The Apartment with Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine. 1960 it was made.
Wow.
And I tend to book the second row, and all my friends turn up, and I offer them a coffee. Obviously, I missed someone.
And they're very upset.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who sent in voice notes, loads of them. We want to take our calls as well, 0344 499 1000 for both of them. You can lift the phone and make a call, and we will get to some callers before 12 o'clock, but loads of voice notes. Chris on reparations, off you go.
Hey Peter, how are you going? About these reparations, they seem to have quite a short memory. It was the Portuguese that started it all with the Europeans, and then the French and the Spanish. I don't hear anybody asking for reparations from them. Oh, and the Belgians as well, and the Dutch. Maybe we should all just cough up.
It's a very good point, and if every country coughs up, surely we should all just not cough up, because the money just goes round and round and round, and who's it actually for? And what happens in 50 years' time when people say, actually, what about my reparations? And what about all the people who say, well, actually, I'm half Caribbean, or I'm a quarter Caribbean, because my grandfather or grandmother was Caribbean, so therefore I should get, what, a quarter of them? I'm not sure. Where does the money go? Does it go to the governments, for example? Do they do it for the benefit of all their citizens? What about citizens who they're spending money on, who maybe go to schools who weren't, whose relatives weren't slaves? There are loads of questions around this. Let's get the thoughts of Lee.
Morning, Peter. Great show. Lee from Newcastle. What about reparations to the British people who've had their lives ruined, lost, or financially decimated by the act of this current and past governments? What about the people of this country?
I think a lot of people are asking that question, Lee. A lot of people, I would say, over the past month or so, you get a sense, when you do the job I do, you get a sense of what people are really annoyed about, what they're interested about, what they're passionate about. And certainly, really since Labour has come in, but particularly in the last month or a couple of months, I think the question is coming up time and time again, what about us? What is the government actually doing positively for the people of Britain? What are they doing for the people of the United Kingdom? They seem to do a lot for the Scours Islands. They seem to focus a lot on that. They are focusing a lot on, well, a little bit at least, on slavery reparations. They're talking about lots of other things. They're talking about lots of other cultures. They're talking about stopping the boats, and that's fine, and that's people coming to this country, and that's an important thing. But what about making life for people in this country better? Because people look at those missteps, for example, around the winter fuel allowance, and they're asking, why are we sending money abroad? Why are we putting £18 billion, which is the current estimate, for the Scours Islands, giving that to Mauritius to take something off us? But actually, there are people here in this country who are thinking about, you know, today here in London, I don't know what it's like where you are, and I never forget that 82% of our viewers and listeners are outside London. But it's a grey day, it's a very foggy day, it's a cool day, I had a big coat on. But there are people who will be making a decision, elderly people, not to turn on the heating today because they haven't got their winter fuel allowance this summer, this winter, and they haven't been able to pay for that. And they may well be listening or watching to this thinking, hold on a second, what about all these other cultures and these other countries? Not to say they're not important, but surely the main thing to do with what a government should be doing is actually looking after its own people. Tony's been in touch on reparations as well. This is what he has to say.
Hi Peter, this is Tony from North Wales. Having just heard the messages from Craig and Wendy, I must say they're absolutely bang on. This is just getting ridiculous. As well as everything else, can all the invaded countries now look for reparation from the countries that invaded them? So we would be on the list for France, for example. It's just getting ridiculous. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Very, very good points there. Karen has also been in touch on reparations.
Hi, Peter. How about this for controversial? How about we get reparations for all those girls that have been abused, murdered, and boys probably, and not just English white girls, but Sikh girls too were targeted from the rape gangs. Let's go to Pakistan and ask that country to give those girls reparations. Can you ever see that happening? I can't. This has got to stop. This is enough. They are dividing the people with all this, but that's their game.
Karen, very, very good points there. Really interesting points there. Let's get another one from John in Dorset. He's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. John, I think reparations is what you want to talk about. You're very welcome to the programme.
Well, it's partly that. I mean, let me put the record straight. I said to your producer that Lammy is not Caribbean. He is born in London of Guyanan parents, and therefore he is a South American. So moving aside, how are you going to establish what reparation would be for? Because I mean, I'm really going over some of the ground that's been covered. There is no evidence that any particular group or individual suffered.
I mean, look, slavery was not a good thing. I don't think anybody's saying that for a second. There were people who were treated appallingly. There were historical wrongs done by this country. They were done by various people in this country. But I agree with you in terms of saying, what is it actually that we're paying it for, and who are we paying it to? That to me, and is it the government? Is it the descendants? Who is it? All those questions would need to be answered, and I don't think we're going to come to a satisfactory conclusion. What do you think, John?
I expect the size of the claims are dependent on the lawyers representing them. I mean, it's quite interesting that Starmer's mate, Philip Sands, is larking about in Mauritius. How much is he getting for setting this up? He is a client of the Mauritian government, for a start, and his other friends seem to be every lawyer who seems to be connected with human rights is in on the game, and I suspect that much of the fee generation is contingent upon advice from the lawyers on how much they think they'll get for their fees.
It does seem a bit cosy. I don't want to cast any aspersions on any of them, but it's very interesting that Philippe Sands, who's a friend of Starmer, he's a friend of Lord Hermer, Richard Hermer is the Attorney General, who I think a lot more scrutiny needs to be on in terms of his role. Very, very interesting thoughts there from John. Thank you. On what we're talking about in the debate desk a little bit earlier on, Jonathan has been in touch about this, about DEI, about diversity, equity and inclusion, and about university funding. Let's hear what Jonathan has to say. Voice note from Jonathan, please, if we could hear that. It's dead easy to say.
John Ram from Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk. Your current guest talking about DEI. That is exactly what everybody thinks. Equality in opportunity, not equality in outcome. Outcome must be based on merit. That's it. That's the only thing that needs to be discussed. These DEI programs that are not based on merit, but based on point scoring for, whether you're a black, lesbian, disabled person or whatever, is just outrageous and, causes issues and problems in the workforce and the inability to do a job. Why would you recruit people who can't do the job? It must be merit-based.
Jonathan, I totally agree with you, and I think that I would love, the fact is it isn't the case and will never be the case because we don't live in an equal society and we never ever will. It's impossible. There are people who say let's strive for it and let's move in different directions and that's all fine. But the fact is we don't live in an equal society. People don't have equal opportunities. I'd love them to. I'd love every child born in this country to have every single opportunity afforded to me. For example, I had many, many opportunities, and I know that I'm sitting here today for lots of reasons, some of them to do with the fact I was born into a very solid middle-class background with two parents who love each other and are married after 53, 54 years, whatever it is. That was a very, very solid foundation and allowed me to thrive. There are lots of people people who don't thrive, who are in that situation, and there are lots of people who do through other situations as well. But the fact is that there are lots and lots of people who are very worried about this equity idea, this idea of equality of outcome, because that is not the same. I'm not going to run a marathon in less than 4 hours. I'm not going to win Wimbledon. I'm not going to become a brain surgeon. I get that. But the idea of equality of outcomes is a really, really worrying one. Deferred success. And there's some people who can't do certain things. There are lots of reasons for that. And I think universities to a degree are being blamed for that. I think lots of workplaces are being blamed for that, saying, well, you don't take enough people from this background or that background. Well, maybe people from that background have been failed in various ways at various times. If you come to a university at age 18, or any institution, a college or any educational institution, and say, right, you've got to take there are people who are historically disadvantaged. They're only getting a C at A level rather than an A star. You've got to take the people who have got C's because they've been historically disadvantaged and they haven't had the same privileges as other people. Well, if they're not actually getting to the same level, if they're not actually ever going to be a good historian or scientist or geographer or whatever, well, what's the point? How's it going to work? And it's fine if you do something, pointless like geography. But when it comes to things like being a doctor, for example, well, I don't really want to be treated by a doctor who's there for reasons other than they're very, very good at medicine. Let me know your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about Israel and the fact that as that 7th of October massacre by Hamas terrorists was happening, what were pro-Palestinian activists doing in London as it was happening? They were picking up the phone to the Metropolitan Police to say, we're having a protest in favour of these people next week. That is what was happening. We'll talk about that in just a second.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
I've just been looking at my Twitter during the break there, and thanks to everybody who has been in touch on this. And there are lots of various people who've got all sorts of opinions there. We'll read some of them out between now and the end of the programme. And Hugh is one of them. He says, on the day when we learn that the Labour government is to enter discussions over reparations, I think a proverb is rather more timely than any. So how about charity begins at home? And there's a really, really good message from Kenny from Edinburgh. I think it's possibly the best message I've received today, although there have been lots of very, very good ones, who says on our next story, which I'll explain in a second, Kenny says, "Hi Cardi P, a pro-Palestinian march on the day of the October the 7th attack." This was a phone call that was made by this organisation, the Palestine Solidarity organisation, talking about a march, because you've got to give 7 days notice of these marches. A pro-Palestinian march planned on the day of the 7th of October attack surely proves that these marches were never about Palestine, but were actually about being anti-Israel. Israel hadn't even hit back yet, so how can people still claim these marches are about anything other than hating Jews, says Kenny. Well, may you ask, Kenny. We're going to talk to Jake Wallace-Simmons in a second, who knows a lot about this, but I just want to bring you up to date on what has actually happened in Israel today, because 3 more Israeli hostages have been released by Hamas terrorists. Now, they are Eli Sharabi. His wife was actually born in Bristol, and she, Liane Sharabi, and their children, 16-year-old Noya and 13-year-old Yahel, were murdered in the 7th of October attack, and his brother Yossi was also murdered after being taken hostage. And I mean, I don't know whether he actually knew that. I expect he didn't. Or Levy, in fact, we spoke to Or Levy's cousin recently, and he was captured by Hamas terrorists from a bomb shelter near the Nova Music Festival. He's been released today. His wife was murdered during the 7th of October attacks, and their son Almog is a toddler, and he's staying with the grandparents, and we heard about his welfare as well. The other hostage released today, who looked incredibly thin. In fact, if you're looking at the screen right now, you can see this man. The photos that his family put out, of course, he was much fuller in the face, and clearly he has been starved by the Hamas terrorists, who are so brave. They're so incredibly brave that they're there in balaclavas with presumably AK-47s, certainly heavy artillery, standing beside them. They're not showing their faces because they are presumably ashamed of the horrendous treatment that they have given Ohad Ben Ami, who is 56. He's a father of 3. He was taken hostage with his wife Raz. She was released during the brief ceasefire period in November. So we are, of course, reflecting on that today. We're reflecting on those hostage releases, and we're getting more information. And of course, as part of that deal, 183 Palestinian prisoners have been given. So it's good news that Ohad and Ellie and Or are back with their families, but of course they have suffered so much since the 7th of October. And that date is significant because it was on that date that the Palestine Solidarity Committee, this is the grouping that has been asking and putting together these protests, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, I should say. They contacted the Metropolitan Police on October the 7th, 2023, at 10 to 1 in the day. So the attacks were actually happening. Hamas terrorists were burning, raping, taking hostages, killing people, murdering people. There is a very, very good documentary on this, which I would highly recommend watching, a Storyville documentary. And as that was actually happening, Israel hadn't retaliated, nothing had happened yet, that didn't happen until the next day. These pro-Palestinian activists were planning a demonstration in London, through London, as the October the 7th massacre was taking place. Yes, really. Jake Wallace-Simons is the author of Israelophobia, the newest version of The Oldest Hatred and What to Do About It. He's also a columnist at The Telegraph and a former editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Jake, I'd love to be surprised, but I'm not even slightly surprised.
Yes, me either. I mean, it's quite hard to conceive of somebody where they look at the news, see the October the 7th massacres of civilians, and their first instinct is to organise an anti-Israel demonstration. And it raises the question, really, are these people demonstrating against something, against Israel, or are they demonstrating for something, for Hamas and for those massacres? Because, of course, Israel hadn't done anything at that point other than have its civilians being slaughtered. Now, are they say they're demonstrating against the occupation? Well, the occupation of Gaza ended in 2006. There was no occupation ever since. And so what are they demonstrating about? I think it's pretty clear. Of course, it is a criminal offence to support Hamas in this country, so they've never done so explicitly. But this is the same group that projected from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, onto Big Ben, if you remember that, a few months ago. What does from the river to the sea...
And presumably that grouping are people who would support them, who projected from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which basically called for ethnic cleansing, but are saying that Donald Trump's suggestion that people leave Gaza and go to other countries is ethnic cleansing and is therefore wrong. So do you agree with ethnic cleansing or do you not?
Exactly. I mean, you can't move for irony here. I mean, these are the same people, presumably, who would say refugees welcome when they're coming from Syria, but stay in the hellhole when it comes to Gaza. I mean, you can't move for irony with these people.
Yeah, the Irish, for example, fascinating that there is an incredible amount of anti-Semitism in Ireland. I actually wrote an article for it, sorry, for your competitors, Jewish News, recently, which you can get online. And Michael D. Higgins, I mean, he can sue me if he wants, but I basically think he's an anti-Semite, the President of Ireland. And we are in a situation where Ireland is saying they won't take Gazan refugees. I mean, the hypocrisy, as you say, is incredible. On this particular issue, a spokesman, I should say, for the Metropolitan Police said the Met was contacted on Saturday the 7th of October at approximately 12:50 via telephone call and informed of the intention to protest. The Met committed this to our systems on the same day, and we are satisfied being contacted by telephone with sufficient means in which to notify the Metropolitan Police Service as the event was taking place 7 days after notification, talking about that. And Ben Jamal, who is the head of the Palestine Solidarity Committee, said the outrage being manifested by the right-wing press and pro-Israeli groups at the news that we updated the Metropolitan Police by 1 p.m. on the 7th of October that we intended to march on this 14th of October is a classic example of the dehumanisation of Palestinian people. What would you make of that?
Well, I think the thing about this story is that most people in Britain had an instinct from the beginning with these marches that they were a bit rum, a bit off, they smelled a bit wrong. They weren't just about human rights concerns, they weren't just about innocent civilians or anything like that, because they haven't marched about any other war, just this one. We knew
about many Muslims who've been killed in lots of other places like Yemen, for example. I just want to slightly give them their due. I don't know why I should, but the Palestinian Solidarity Committee told the Telegraph newspaper it was already clear by the morning that Israeli attacks on Gaza will be of an indiscriminate violence we had not witnessed before, and the 2.3 million people in Gaza, more than 50% of the children, were at severe risk. It is entirely appropriate, therefore, that PSC would call for a protest that would seek an immediate ceasefire and call for the root causes of Israeli occupation and apartheid to be addressed. Those who seek to demonise the organisers of and participants in protests for justice for Palestinians do so to deflect attention from the crimes against humanity that Israel has committed. We shall not be deflected by their apologism for genocide. Factually not a genocide. Factually not a genocide. Jake.
It's gaslighting. That's the problem. It's gaslighting. They're pretending that they were only protesting out of humanitarian concern, but we've known from the start that hasn't been the case. I mean, just a few weeks ago, they were asked to route their march away from a synagogue, some other roads that didn't pass a synagogue, and they furiously resisted that with every bone in their body. It's just gaslighting.
Who else resisted that? Who else resisted that? Let's remember that there are elected members of Parliament, including John McDonnell, including Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader of the Labour Party, who resisted that as well. I've actually just been sent something by a viewer in Northern Ireland who says that is made me aware of the fact that Jerry Carroll, who is an elected member of the Northern Ireland Assembly, which is of course a UK parliamentary institution, devolved institution, on the 7th of October, put a tweet out at 9:19, victory to the Palestinian resistance. I mean, what goes through these people's minds when they see what Hamas terrorists were doing and they essentially celebrate it?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of past leaders of the Palestine Solidarity campaign who have met Hamas leaders in Gaza, by the way, so there are past connections there. But there was a further story which adds another dimension to this morning in the Telegraph, Jacob Friedland's story, which revealed that one of the leaders of the Friends of Al-Aqsa, which is another group who organised the first protest alongside the Palestine Solidarity campaign, Ismail Patel, is the brother of Shokat Adam, the Gaza Independent in Leicester South, who unseated Jonathan Ashworth, if you can recall, in that very bad-tempered campaign that was full of intimidation and, in fact, Jonathan Ashworth was forced to hide in a vicarage at one point from screaming pro-Gaza fanatics. So there's a lot of relationships here, and we're talking about a movement in Britain that targets Israel and Jews, but also our democratic process. And it's something which everyone has known, as I've said, for 16 months, that it's been about this, that it's been badly
Shock at
intentioned.
Adam, it should be
We've
said.
been gaslit to tell us that it's really about humanitarian concerns. It hasn't been.
Shock at Adam and the other three pro-Palestinian MPs there, along with Jeremy Corbyn, who's of course been in Parliament since 1983. I mean, they would all argue, Jake, look, we're democratically elected here. This is the will of the people. This is democracy.
Sure, but I don't think the democratic process really involves the intimidation of rival candidates. Not that they necessarily endorsed it themselves, but their followers certainly did. And that was a very, very dark point in the democratic process of our country. And we've seen similar scenes of violence and intimidation on the streets in these Palestinian protests week in, week out. And the British public have been gaslit, telling us that actually it's purely about the innocent Palestinians. It's never been about that.
In terms of what Israel is doing in terms of releasing those Palestinian prisoners, I absolutely cannot stand when I hear, and I've heard this unchallenged on various media, including the BBC, when they're referred to as hostages. They are absolutely not hostages. They are prisoners, many of whom have done horrendous things that are in Israeli jails. 183 of them given back today for those 3 hostages. What do you make of what's going on in Israel at the moment, Jake?
Well, to see the scenes of jubilation when these murderers are released to their families on the West Bank and elsewhere, there's not just a sense of jubilation, there's a total brazen shamelessness at celebrating the bloodletting of Jews and terror, which just speaks very, very badly about the core of that society. Not that there aren't moderates there, of course there are, but there's a real radicalism that's taken place, that's taken root throughout Palestinian society, and that is so difficult to deal with, and it really is at the heart of a lot of the unrest over there.
Jake, thank you. That's Jake Wallace-Simons there, author of Israelophobia, the newest version of The Oldest Hatred, and What to Do About It. He's also a columnist at The Telegraph and former editor of the Jewish Chronicle. The People Before Profit group, who was mentioning there, that guy Jerry Carroll in Northern Ireland. I'd love to do a bit more on that. I think it's very, very interesting actually, and especially those 4 elected MPs who are pro-Palestinian. I've been trying to interview them for a while. We've asked them on numerous occasions, but that People Before Profit organisation is in Ireland North and South. It's front and centre of almost every pro-Palestinian rally in Belfast and Dublin since the 7th of October. And I mean, a month after that guy Jerry Carroll, that Assembly member in Northern Ireland, a month after his tweet in saying victory to the Palestinian resistance. I mean, he put, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And these people are elected by people in the United Kingdom. They are paid for by our taxes. It really does worry me that these kind of opinions are supported in that way anyway. There's lots more to come. We're going to continue to talk about reparations. There's some callers who want to get in on a few things as well. We'll do that before 12. And we're going to talk about perhaps the best pun ever in a UK newspaper, which was in The Sun, when Inverness Caledonian Thistle beat Celtic. Supercalligubalistic, Celtic are atrocious. It was 25 years ago today. What are your favourite puns? Let me know.
We can show you this. This is about them saying how many people they have deported. Now, what do you notice about this, Noah? The fact is, there's no Labour branding on it. So they're saying they are hitting a 5-year high in migrant removals. No Labour branding, firstly. Secondly, I don't think they can do this, but they've done it in a Pantone colour, which is very similar, if not the same, as another political party, i.e. Reform UK.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who's been in touch, including Jay from Coventry, who says, I'm, from this moment, going to identify as a mule. My grades were rubbish, but because there are no mules in university, I'm going to apply on diversity credits. I'm going to be a dumbass at university to help get the funding. Ha ha ha, says Jay in Coventry. Thank you. We will be raising a smile in just a second about puns. Steve says, am I missing something regarding reparations? Haven't we given them a massive collection of islands in the Caribbean? If the citizens of those islands can't make it pay, the fault lies with those people, not us, says Steve in Ipswich. I want to talk about reparations a little bit more, actually. Jules has been in touch with a voice note. This is what Jules has to say.
Hi, Peter. How about some reparations for our own children that were sent, young boys were sent up chimneys? We had young people working in the mills, running under working looms. They lost limbs. Maybe they need some reparations. What do you think? Great show. Thank you.
Jules, I think you make a very good point, and that was, to all intents and purposes, slavery as well. I mean, they were paid, but very, very little. I mean, it was a very, very similar life to the life that many slaves will have had. Not all, of course, but that's a very, very good point. One more voice note today. That is from Jacqueline on reparations.
Peter, I wish you'd stop turning around and saying that we done historical wrongs. We righted the wrongs of these historical wrongs. And we are still today a very open country that most people, even though they seem to hate us, want to come. So we can't be that bad, can we? And by the way, it was the Africans that enslaved the Caribbean culture. So maybe you want to start looking towards Africa for the reparations, and all of the Arab countries as well. And that is still going on today in a lot of these countries, this slavery.
Okay, Jacqueline, thanks. A very impassionate plea, very impassionate thoughts there. I mean, can you right historical wrongs? I'm not sure. Jacqueline thinks we have, and that's absolutely fine. She's entitled to her opinion, and on this programme, we disagree without being disagreeable. One thing we also love on this programme is puns, and actually, it's 25 years today since arguably the best pun ever in a UK newspaper. This was The Sun, and it was after a small Scottish team called Inverness Caledonian Thistle beat Celtic. Celtic were, and indeed are, the mighty team in Scotland, probably the #1 team in Scotland over many years, and Inverness Caledonian Thistle unexpectedly beat them. And the headline was Super Cali Go Ballistic, Celtic are atrocious, which was just a brilliant headline from Celtic being beaten 3-1 by Inverness Caledonian Thistle. Let's talk to Steve N. Allen, who's a comedian. Steve, what makes a good pun, do you think?
Well, I mean, the example you've got there, it's length, isn't it? The yes. reason that is such a good one is there are so many words. To get a bit nerdy about it, and you've come to the right guy if you want nerdiness about puns. Excellent. It's a heteronymic paranamasic relationship. So It's a pun where the words don't quite fit, but they fit enough. Noel Edmonds, when he used to do Telly Addicts, the entire show was basically him doing those type of puns where the words don't quite fit. And I think we love them. They're dad jokes. There's something it's one of the nicest forms of humour. People degrade puns, don't they, saying like, oh, you're the cheap whatever. No, it's the category of humour that no one's really getting offended. Everyone thinks there's going to be
I
some
love puns, and I love puns. I love dad jokes. And actually, we should say that it was a sub-editor. So the sub-editors, as you will know, Steve, are people at newspapers. They edit all the different. They get what's called the raw copy in. So the reporter writes the piece on their computer. That then comes in. The sub-editor looks through it and checks it and changes things and makes it all look beautiful. Designs the page and also writes the headline. And those are called sub-editors. And Paul Hickson was the sub-editor at The Sun to write that headline. I wonder what your best pun has been, Steve, because I can tell you mine.
Go for it.
Well, it was when my dad and I went to see James Bond a few years ago, and my dad sort of remarked on, he's a big Shakespeare fan as well, I should say, because this is a reference to Macbeth, and he was holding, we're going to see James Bond, and he was holding this huge popcorn, a big drink, and he said, gosh, there's a lot of food here, a lot of food and drink here. And I said, yes, there's something of a feast at the Spectre.
I mean, yeah, look at you, Mr. Highbrow. My best pun in comparison is the lowest of the lowbrow. I still use this pun. I went through a phase of doing lots of puns in my stand-up and then didn't really have them. There's one that stuck around, and it's a little bit of material that I do every so often about wearing the boxer shorts that have the tube map on. You know, it's like a novelty thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you move to London, you get the tube map. And I say I like it because it's the only time I get to point there and say, look, that's Wapping. And it's a pun that you get away with just about on radio.
That's very good. That's very good. Yes, I like that. I like that very much. I may have to use that again. Your fee will be 0p. Why do we love puns? Is it just wordplay? Is it just something that we like as a nation? And why is that, do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I think we like it probably, now this is an opinion, there's no data to back this up, but I think English has more going for it for puns because there are more ways of saying things, which means you can get a little bit closer to a pun. Probably the first pun that we used to learn back in the old days was when it's a door, not a door, when it's a jar. Now, that can only happen in English. You can translate that to French, and it's like, you know, when it's le pour, not le pour, when it's slightly open. It makes no sense. So I think we've got such a messy language coming from like 3 different languages squidged together to make what we've got. That gives us more chances to do puns. And I do think it's the fact that they're not offensive. They're little puzzles that we get to solve in our brain, and we go, oh, that's quite nice. And it's the one category of joke where no one's going to cry or get you cancelled.
I made so many puns in a particular office in Belfast where I worked for the BBC, and there was a brilliant producer who worked with me called Lena Ferguson, and someone said, look, you're gonna have to put, you know, £1 in the box every time. We're going to start fining you for the fact that you're making so many puns, Peter and Lena. Honestly, this is absolutely ridiculous. And Lena piped up and said, would that be a punishment box?
Ooh.
I thought that was quite good. No? No?
Exactly. At least that one's a homonymic relationship rather than a heteronymic relationship.
I love this. I love the technicality of puns. This is fascinating. My goodness. I
think it's one of the things you should do as a comedian is, you know, Google it at least. Do a bit of research about what you're using.
Yes, indeed. Are puns as good these days, or are they just, have we done them all? I mean, are there new puns that we can really think about? Because so many people say, oh, I've heard that joke before, it's an old thing, or it's not as good. What do you think, Steve?
Oh, I think there's an infinite number of puns. There'll always be ways of doing it. And I think it's having a resurgence. Your Tim Vines, those kind of Gary Delaney comedians who are one-liners, and even Jimmy Carr's a one-liner, so most of that's going to be puns. And there are loads of clips online, I don't know if you've been down the same rabbit hole as me, where you can just see people doing dad jokes to each other, trying to make the other one laugh.
Okay.
So I think they'll never go away. They're such beautiful little gifts of humour. There's no way to get rid of the dad jokes. By the way, if you collect lots of dad jokes, do you know where you should keep them?
Tell me.
In a database.
I see what you did there. Listen, thank you. Oh, wow. Oh, that's Tech Up Dave has helped us with that. Steve, thank you very much indeed. That is Steve N. Allen, the comedian there. 25 years since Supercalifragilistic Celtic are atrocious. Thank you to this person who says, I was a scriptwriter for Edmonds and Telealex. My best pun came when Noel Gordon left Crossroads. I wrote, she'd shaken off her motel coil. It wasn't used. I think that's quite a good pun. Listen, there's quite a lot more coming up on this station, but before I tell you about it, I just want to thank the top team behind the glass. Chris Jacobs is a producer, Tommy Bateson the assistant producer, Dave Rhodes the technical